In the modern underworld, silence is the most expensive commodity you can buy. For decades, the biggest drug lords in the UK did not fear the police on the street. They did not fear the sirens. They feared the wiretap. They knew that one slip-up on a standard Nokia or an iPhone, one loose text, one accidental phone call could bring a multi-million-pound empire crashing down. So they stopped using them. They migrated to the Ghost network. They bought devices that cost £1, £500 upfront and thousands more in subscription fees. Devices with no GPS, no microphone, no camera, no way to trace them. Devices that promised military-grade encryption that not even the CIA, the MI5, or the National Crime Agency could crack. They felt invincible. They spoke freely. They discussed murder, importation and money laundering as casually as you would discuss a grocery list. But there was a problem, a catastrophic flaw in the plan. They believed the marketing. They thought these phones were a shield. In reality, they were a tracker. And on one sunny morning in 2020, thousands of criminals woke up to realize that for the last 3 months, the police had not just been listening, they had been sitting in the chat room with them. This is the story of a man who moved £58 million worth of cocaine using vintage cars. A man who thought he was a ghost. A man whose £20 million empire was destroyed by the very device he bought to protect it. To understand the fall, we first have to understand the scale of the climb. Meet Robert Brooks. To his neighbors in Hertford, Robert was nothing special. He was 50 years old, a bit rough around the edges maybe, but seemingly harmless. He listed his occupation as a part-time driving instructor. He lived in a modest terraced house. He mowed his lawn. He complained about the weather. He was the definition of unremarkable. But Robert Brooks did not make his money teaching teenagers how to parallel park. That was the cover. In reality, Brooks was a logistics genius. A high-tier wholesale importer who had figured out a way to flood the UK with Class A drugs without ever touching a speedboat or a lorry himself. He was not a street dealer, he was a CEO. His empire was built on a very specific, very clever niche: vintage cars. Brooks realized that customs officers scan thousands of shipping containers a day. They check fruit, furniture, electronics. But when a classic 1960s Jaguar or a vintage Mercedes SL comes through, people treat it with respect. It is a collector's item. It is fragile. You do not start ripping the bumpers off a £50,000 classic car unless you are absolutely sure there is something inside. And Brooks was banking on them not being sure. He set up a legitimate-looking front company. He would purchase vintage vehicles in the Caribbean, supposedly for restoration and resale in the UK. But before these cars were shipped, they went into a workshop in the tropics. Mechanics working for the cartel would carefully remove the fuel tanks, the door panels, and the bumpers. Inside, they would pack high-purity cocaine, kilogram after kilogram. Then, the car would be reassembled, polished, and put on a container ship. It would sail across the Atlantic, dock in Tilbury or Southampton, and sail right through customs. Once the car was in the UK, it would be taken to a workshop in Northamptonshire, the drugs would be stripped out, and the car would be sold on. It was elegant, it was sophisticated, and it was generating an absolute fortune. Between 2019 and 2020 alone, police estimate Brooks imported nearly 2 tons of cocaine. The street value, over £58 million. But running an empire this size requires communication. You have to talk to the suppliers. In South America, you have to talk to the mechanics. You have to talk to the drivers. You have to talk to the money launderers. And you can't do that on a Vodafone SIM card. So Robert Brooks went shopping. He bought the gold standard of criminal communication. He bought an EncroChat device. For those who do not know, let us talk about EncroChat. If you walked into a high street phone shop in 2019, you would not see these on the shelves. You had to know a guy. They looked like standard Android handsets, often BQ Aquarius models. But the software was stripped out. The GPS was physically removed. The microphone was disabled. When you turned it on, it looked like a normal phone running a harmless operating system. But if you held down a specific combination of buttons, it booted into a secret, hidden partition. This was the EncroChat interface. It allowed you to send encrypted messages and make VoIP calls that were routed through servers in France. It had a panic wipe feature if you got pulled over by the police. You could type in a PIN on the lock screen, and the phone would instantly erase everything on it. It would turn into a brick. For criminals, this was magic. It cost about £3,000 a year for a subscription, but it was worth every penny. It gave them total peace of mind. Robert Brooks picked his handle. On the EncroChat network, he was not Robert, he was JaguarPalace. A fitting name for a man moving cocaine in luxury cars. Under the cloak of JaguarPalace, Brooks became arrogant. He did not just use the phone for necessary coordinates, he used it to micromanage his entire life. He treated this £3,000 hardened criminal tool like a personal diary. He messaged his associates about the quality of the work, the drugs. He negotiated prices. He complained about delays at the docks. He even organized the logistics of a shipment of 57 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside a Mercedes-Benz AMG. He felt safe. He felt untouchable. He believed the hype. But while Brooks was sitting in his garden in Hertford, typing away on his secure device, something was happening in Europe that would change the landscape of organized crime forever. French and Dutch police had been investigating the servers that hosted EncroChat. They realized that they could not crack the encryption code, it was too strong. So they did something smarter. They pushed a software update to the phones. Criminals like Brooks saw a notification on their screens, "System update available." They clicked "Install," thinking it was a security patch from EncroChat HQ. It was not. It was malware planted by the police. This malware did not break the encryption. It bypassed it. It recorded the messages before they were encrypted. Right as the user typed them on the screen, it took screenshots. It harvested notes. Suddenly, the National Crime Agency in the UK had a live feed. They were not just listening to the wire, they were reading Brooks' mind. This is where the tragedy of dumb criminals comes into play. When you are a high-level drug importer, your only defense is anonymity. Even if the police crack the phone, they have to prove that you were the one holding it. A smart criminal would use the phone sparingly. They would not mention their real name. They would not talk about their personal life. They would keep the digital persona of JaguarPalace completely separate from the human being Robert Brooks. Robert Brooks was not a smart criminal. Because he believed the phone was uncrackable, he got lazy. The police, reading the live feed of JaguarPalace, started to see messages that linked the drug lord directly to the driving instructor. Mistake number 1. The birthday. On the day of his own birthday, JaguarPalace sent a message thanking an associate for a birthday wish. Police checked Robert Brooks' records. The dates matched perfectly. Mistake number 2. The location. The malware on the phone allowed police to triangulate the cell towers. The device was pinging off night after night. The JaguarPalace device was sleeping at the exact same address in Hertford, where Robert Brooks lived. Mistake number 3. The photos. This is the nail in the coffin. The secure phone had a camera, but the flash and software were modified to prevent accidental data leakage. However, Brooks used it to take photos of his goods. But he did not just photograph the cocaine. In one photo sent to a buyer, proving the drugs had arrived, the reflection in the car window showed a distinct figure. In another, the background of the image matched the interior of Brooks' own workshop. He was documenting his own crime scene and sending it to the police, pixel by pixel. But the most damning evidence was the sheer volume of chat. He spoke about his family. He spoke about his health. He complained about specific life events that police could easily verify with standard surveillance. He had paid thousands of pounds for anonymity and then spent every day doxing himself. August 2020. Operation Venetic is in full swing. Across the UK, police are smashing down doors at 4:00 a.m. They are arresting untouchable kingpins in their boxes. The EncroChat network has gone dark, and the users are in a panic. For Robert Brooks, the end came swiftly. Officers raided his home in Hertford. They raided his workshop in Northamptonshire. At the workshop, they found the smoking gun, or rather, the smoking car. There, sitting in the garage, were the vintage vehicles. A Ford Mustang. A Mercedes. And inside them, nothing. They were empty. But the police did not need the drugs to be in the car right that second. They had the chats. They had JaguarPalace boasting about the 57 kilos he had just moved. They had the photos he took. They had the timeline. They arrested Brooks. He denied everything, of course. He was just a car enthusiast, a driving instructor. He did not know anything about drugs. Then, they showed him the transcripts. They showed him the messages where he discussed the purity of the cocaine. They showed him the messages where he panicked about a shipment being delayed. They showed him the geolocation data that placed the phone in his hand in his house every single night. The driving instructor's defense crumbled. The ghost network had turned into the most detailed confession letter in British legal history. The trial was a formality. The evidence was overwhelming. In September 2021, Robert Brooks stood in the dock at St. Albans Crown Court. The judge did not see a driving instructor. He saw a man who had orchestrated the importation of Class A drugs on an industrial scale. A man who had flooded the streets of the UK with misery, all to fund a lifestyle he could not even publicly flash. Robert Brooks was sentenced to 21 years in prison. His associates, the men who helped him strip the cars and distribute the cash, were also jailed. The entire network was dismantled. The vintage cars were seized. The money was gone. The reputation was destroyed. And it all came down to one fatal error in judgment. Robert Brooks thought that technology could replace tradecraft. He thought that if he paid enough money for a magic Blackberry, he did not need to be careful. He forgot the golden rule of crime: there is no such thing as a secret if you write it down. He bought a device to keep him out of prison. In the end, it was the only witness the prosecution needed to put him there. The £20 million empire did not fall because of a snitch, or a rival gang, or a lucky police patrol. It fell because Robert Brooks trusted a piece of plastic more than he trusted his own common sense. And in the brutal world of organized crime, that is a mistake you only get to make once.